They used to be called probiotics, but the skincare industry abused that term to the extent that it was almost meaningless. So the term live biotherapeutics came about.
Welcome to Skin as It Should Be, the podcast that takes an unfiltered look at skincare and the science behind it. With master chemist Trevor Steyn and creative professional Geoff Paton. In this episode, we'll be talking about why the future of skincare is here, now. Maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about who's doing what out there at the moment.
So in the microbiome space, there are two kind of clear paths. Obviously, the primary delivery is, people looking at biotherapeutics. So that is the administration of a live microbe. And they used to be called probiotics, but the skincare industry abused that term to the extent that it was almost meaningless. So the term live biotherapeutics came about. And there are two kind of paths for live biotherapeutics. The one is the scheduled drug path, and the other is the more over-the-counter path. So in the drug path, you know how funding works there. You need patent, and to patent, you need to genetically engineer a microbe. So that's the one clear path. Are these genetically engineered microbes that are then administered as scheduled drugs, and the other path is the over-the-counter path, and that generally uses microbes that occur naturally.
Okay. Just before we get into that, how, in your mind, did the skincare industry, denigrate this probiotics ideal word?
It started out, I guess, as a marketing department making a decision to use the term probiotic when the product didn't necessarily include a live microbe. The definition of a probiotic is that it's a live microbe that has a beneficial effect on the host when administered in sufficient numbers. So that's why they're generally measured in CFU, colony forming units per milliliter or per gram. But the industry started using the term to mean, first of all, dead, was referring to dead or tyndalized microbes, and then to what are called lysates. Those are microbes that have been shattered and broken into tiny bits, and then to the ferment that's left behind after microbes were in the product. So now really starting to stretch the boundary, and then eventually there were companies that were referring to lactic acid being a probiotic because lactic acid is produced by some microbes. I guess as kind of usual with skincare, the term ends up meaning very little to anybody, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds about right for marketing, doesn't it? Okay, so tell us a little bit more about what the guys on the drug side of things are doing.
Yeah, so it's really interesting work actually. Because of our company ethics, a lot of people would assume that I'm violently against genetic engineering. I'm not. I just think that we need a more complete understanding of what we're doing before we start delivering these things without safety mechanisms in place. And to be fair, some of these companies are doing a pretty good job of that. So, there's one company called Esse. They've got some really high-end researchers there. Julia O out of the Jackson Labs involved. So, and they're largely focusing on inflammatory skin disorders. And they're using genetically modified Staph epidermidis. It's a natural commensal on skin, and there are strains, and they've chosen specific strains that target Netherton's disease. It's a genetic disorder on skin, and cancer-related rashes are their two primary targets, and they're in phase 1b trials already. So, they're making really good progress. There's a company called Misuse. Richard Gallo's involved in that. They're based out of San Diego. So and they're largely targeting atopic dermatitis, and they're using Staph hominis for that. And they're in phase 2 trials already. And they've got other strains. They're looking at acne and seborrheic dermatitis and rosacea as well. There's a company called Biotherapeutics. So that's the core company that launched Mother Dirt. So Mother Dirt licensed their technology to deliver those live probiotics back in 2015. So when we launched in Feb 2015, they launched just after us, around about May. So what they're doing is using a nitrosomonas strain. It's an archaea actually. It's a really nice technology. And they're in phase 2B trials already for atopic dermatitis. They're also looking at acne, also phase 2B. And they've tested it on a lot of people now. They were in the market for quite a long time as well, so they've got that data. But they've treated 1,700 patients already. It's mostly an atopic dermatitis eczema product. Those are the three that are headed towards scheduled drugs, topical live products that end up as scheduled drugs. Yeah.
And with that, like for example, with the diet pills, seems to be, that area of medicine comes with its side effects. The path they're taking, will that take them down things that need to be tested over time before they can be applied safely, or is everything looking pretty good?
Yeah. So for example, Azetra's technology, they're looking. They've genetically modified in the direction of I'm trying not to use scientific terminology, but so it's a microbe that requires addition of an amino acid. It can't produce its own one of the key amino acids, and it's obligate. It needs that addition of this external amino acid to survive. So the product will include that. So as soon as you stop adding that amino acid, this thing's probably going to die. So it's kind of a built-in fail-safe. So if you don't want that microbe on skin anymore, you stop applying the amino acid, and it's safe. It's not going to colonize. Some of the other guys, rampant colonization of nitrosomonas from Biotherapeutics is not a huge threat, I don't think. Archaea, there's never been a pathogenic archaea that's come through, so that's not a massive crisis, I don't think. And Staph hominis, I think they're patenting existing strains. I'm not too sure what they've done to prevent over-colonization, but I don't think it's a huge risk. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's generally safe because it's microbiome focused.
I don't know. That might be, in the long term, that might be a dodgy line of reasoning, but for now it's working out,
Okay, so you have to wait and see how it goes.
Yes,
Or early days, like anything with technology. Yeah. And on the over-the-counter side, how is that different?
Yeah, so the guys are largely focusing on GRAS species, so generally regarded as safe. So these are species that we've lived with for hundreds of years already. So, for example, Streptococcus thermophilus, that's been used to ferment milk for a very long time, and we're now exploring the potential of using that on skin. These are microbes that are well recognized by our own immune system, so they're well accepted. There's no danger of pathogenicity. But the patent is not really a strong possibility there. Not unless you genetically modify them, and as soon as you genetically modify them, they're not generally regarded as safe anymore. So we've gone on that route, as have many others. So there's a company called Esse Biomedic, and I know all these guys from the skin microbiome conferences. So I guess I've in writing this book that I'm doing is I've just been in touch with all of them recently. It's been good to reconnect with the original crowd. So Esse Biomedic is sold to Beiersdorf. And they're using live Cutibacterium acnes, and they're looking at an aging impact. So, as you get older, your Cutibacterium levels decrease, and they're looking at strains that will slow that decline. And then they're also looking at acne. It's a kind of nuts. This shows how microbiome thinking has turned everything on its head. Propionibacterium acne used to be viewed as this, propionibacterium causes acne, we've got to kill them. And now we're using propionibacterium to combat acne because there are a whole lot of strains that clearly have a beneficial effect there. So that's Esse Biomedic. There's a Belgian company called Yun. They're doing microcapsules, so these tiny little polyurethane balls. You can feel them in the product, and they burst when you apply the product. So that's the way they maintain their stability, is that they have a tiny little capsule almost inside the product that bursts. And there's they use a range of different lactobacillus strains in their products, and they target acne, the vaginal microbiome. They also target athlete's foot. So they've got I quite like their one technology. It's the lactobacillus. So obviously stabilizing these things is not so easy, but they've got an aerosol for feet. So that's the one that they've got. And then there's Esse, and we're looking at lactobacillus and bacillus and pediococcus is a new one that we're looking at. We're particularly interested in that for pigmentation. And we're also looking at non-GRAS species. So we've obviously over the years perfected our encapsulation technology. So our products are generally oil-based, but we've now got water-based ones as well. We're encapsulating these microbes in like very, very small, smaller than 70 micron spheres. And it's only when they see water on the surface of skin that those microbes are released. But we're also looking at non-GRAS species. So the regulatory hurdles there are a little more intense, but we're looking at strains of Gulosibacter. So I was talking about AMPs in some of the previous podcasts, and so the Gulosibacter produce some really cool AMPs that we think are going to be a game changer on skin, but we've got more testing to do still. And then the Cocuria strains that we're looking at. So one of the big groups of microbes that's different between us modern folk and hunter-gatherers is that Cocuria is a very dominant microbe in hunter-gatherers. And we've all but lost it, below 1%, certainly for the vast majority of people. We're looking at reintroducing that. Yeah.
And what makes GRAS and non-GRAS species?
So there are two systems. So GRAS is an American system, and QPS is the European equivalent. QPS is qualitative presumption of safety. These are species that have been with us for a really long time, and they're regarded as safe. They're used in fermentation, perhaps in cheeses or beer or where so they're used somewhere, and we've been ingesting these things at incredibly high volume with no deleterious effect for quite a long time. So there are microbes that have got a history, and a stamp,
and have been used in beer. So And in terms of the industry, how come there's so few players? I mean, it feels like when you talk about skincare, there doesn't seem like there's a lot of players in this space.
Geez, it's actually kind of disturbing to see. I mentioned that I was phoning around. It's disturbing to see how many of these players have gone out of business. Look, it's tough to keep microbes alive in a cosmetic product. That hurdle is not trivial. It took us 2 years of murdering very large numbers of microbes before we finally came right. And so I think, I don't know if you've seen that adoption curve. Like as a new trend hits, there's this rapid uptake, and then what happens is it kind of peaks out because everybody's claiming stuff that's not really easily substantiated. And then you start cleaning out the pretenders, right? So yeah, those first lawsuits started coming through, and I mean, I'm old enough to have lived through this already in a way, because when the term organic started becoming cool in the early 2000s, that was our point of difference. We were certified organic, and we were certified organic, but there were brands of shampoo that were called organics that didn't have a single organic ingredient anywhere near them, and yet they were allowed to fly, right? So the term organic was quickly perverted by the skincare industry, and before you knew it, that kind of everybody was claiming some level of organic. And then the first lawsuits come banging through, and the whole industry goes, whoa, okay, I get it now. We're going to have to be a little more honest about how we claim organic. And the same sort of process is happening with probiotics. So, what you saw was this like massive uptake initially, then the big lawsuits start coming through. So the Unilever brand, Dove, they had an issue. I know there were a couple of others as well that came through, where you have these class action lawsuits that even if they don't result in monster fines and massive penalties, they at least go, hey, like, you can't carry on doing this. You can't carry on using this term. You're deluding people. So I think venture capital pulled away, and that resulted in the folding of a large number of companies. So, when I was getting back in touch with all the original folk that were in the market, a lot of them have folded, unfortunately. But there are, like I said in the intro, there's some good companies left. So I think now, once the terms cleaned up, and once the false claims are out of the market, there's actually a really nice runway now for genuine establishment of real microbiome players.
What did Unilever claim? And were you kind of happy that they got a little bit of a smack from a science point of view?
So they claim microbiome friendly, and there were ingredients that I guess the class action lawsuit folks found deleterious to the microbiome rather than friendly. So there was that, and there was actually another one where there was another class action lawsuit for the misuse of the term probiotic. So they claimed there was a probiotic, and it was abundantly clear that there were no live microbes in the product, and that class action lawsuit came through, and they've stopped the claim, which is good. And I think, I almost feel sorry for those brands, because everyone was doing it, right? Like, the whole industry was abusing the term. I guess they just choose the biggest players to pull them up on, so that it makes a statement for the rest of the industry. But at least you're starting to see people say things like postbiotic or prebiotic with a little more clarity.
Yeah. Okay, which is a good thing, but it is, it's always the biggest that get hit first. So do a
we're
service
tiny,
to
so
everyone.
they ignore us.
Not after the podcast, and you've just indicted Unilever. No, you didn't say anything bad. I'll put those words in your mouth. But how do you keep your live counts up in your products? Because you're talking about people being cleaned out and it being quite a tough environment. So how do you go about making sure that those CFU counts are up and good?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different techniques, right? So I mentioned Microbiome. They used a buffer suspension. So basically what you do is you create a pH stable, aqueous, so completely water-based product that is preservative-free, and then you add your microbes to that. And they don't have any food, right? So they can't grow, but they just hang in stasis for a while. That is, the shelf life's limited. So, out of the fridge, you've got 3 months total shelf life. That's not very long to get product from A to B. Getting product into people's hands, you're going to have to use refrigeration or something to extend that a little. They can get up to around 6 months with refrigeration, but it's hard yards with buffer suspensions. The other technique I mentioned the brand Yun. They've got those little polyurethane capsules. So there, you create a tiny little capsule, and you can create a microenvironment in that keeps the lactobacilli alive. I mentioned also aerosols. So, to keep these things alive, you've got to keep them away from water or keep them away from nutrients. So the Biome guys are keeping the nutrients away. And Yun and us and many others are using the available water. You make sure that microbe doesn't have enough water to start growing, and you hold it in stasis that way after encapsulating it. So when it's like that, you can actually put it in an aerosol because there's no water in a spray can, right? So so Yun are using that quite effectively for their foot product. There were also other companies that were considering using Staph epidermidis in underarm sprays with an aerosol, which is very clever, except for the fact that you've probably going to breathe while you're spraying this, and you might breathe in very large numbers of staph microbes. And the thing is that, these are good microbes, but they're good microbes for skin, not for lung. So maybe breathing them would make not a great idea. So but
just leaving that one out there.
But then there's encapsulation. So that's the technology we use. In that we take a very high concentration of microbes in a prebiotic mix. So it's in solution, the microbes are in suspension, and then we spray into a very deep vacuum. And what that does is it makes the water evaporate super fast, even at low temperature. So you make these very, very tiny balls, like I said, below 70 microns. And you can't feel that when you apply them to the skin. That the balls are too small, and they dissolve really quickly as well in any sweat or any water that you add afterwards. And as soon as they dissolve, they've got a prebiotic around them, so they've got the food they need to start growing. And that's the way we get live microbes onto the surface of skin.
And just in terms of live versus dead or tinderlized microbes, benefits?
We see much higher benefits with live microbes. Obviously, I guess, that microbe, to quote Chris Callerworth, the guy that's doing the underarm product, a live microbe is going to be adapting and it's going to be producing things. A dead microbe is going to dock maybe, but it's not going to be actively responding to its environment or actively colonizing on skin. So I guess it's not surprising that we see higher efficacy with live.
Yeah. So one is good as one is great.
Yes. Yeah. I wouldn't say you don't see efficacy with tinderlized or lysed microbes. So lysed means shear broken. You get efficacy there because you use you've still got their antimicrobial peptides. You've got their matrix but like I said, they're not active. They're not metabolically active.
And responsive. Okay, so that's a bit about what you put in now. For you, the exciting stuff I know is the future, and you battle to stop innovating. So what's out there now, and what's exciting you in the future of this part of skincare?
So, a venture capitalist asked me that question at the very first Skin Microbiome conference, and I wasn't expecting the question, and I don't know if I answered it perfectly, but I said phage therapy was the way of the future. To me, it just seemed like that was like the thing that's got to surely it's got to take hold. Unfortunately, there's been no real development in that space since then.
What is it, by the way? Just to interrupt you there.
So a phage is a virus that preys on bacteria. So it allows like a really precision route to knocking out a specific microbe. So, for example, Staph aureus is responsible for around 80% of eczema, atopic dermatitis. You could use a phage to knock out just Staph. So you could build a phage for that microbe and just take out that bad player.
It sounds awesome.
Sounds amazing. Yeah, it sounds amazing. So we've tried to use it. And we've stopped trying now.
So it sounds amazing, but it ain't amazing.
No, I mean, maybe we're not good enough. But what we can't get right is how specific these phages are. We found there's like a sweet spot of how all-encompassing your phage is. Overwhelmingly, it'll knock out like a particular strain of Staph aureus. So you'll go knock out that strain, and then you just have a bloom of another strain almost immediately afterwards. So there's we didn't have trouble with stability, so we managed to keep them alive and active. Well, not that a virus is ever really alive, but it's a weird piece of little biological machinery. But anyway, these phages are stable. But geez, it was like, again, playing whack-a-mole. You knock this strain out, the next one pops up, you knock that strain out. And just so I do think that, and here's maybe where genetic engineering really comes through. I do think you could get it right. I just don't think that we can fund it for long enough so that we do get it right. Is kind of where we're at. And I know there are companies working on phages, and they're increasingly used in agriculture. Actually, animals aren't like humans and don't go, "You, a virus." So they are used instead of antibiotics in many agricultural applications. So I think it's definitely going to come through in humans. I just think I don't want to be head of the marketing department that has to say, well, we're going to put this virus on you, especially not post-COVID. Another thing that I think's coming is light, the use of different wavelengths of light. You're seeing a lot of it already. A lot of it's absolute bullshit, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean that all of it's garbage, So I do think that using light to manipulate the microbiome is an interesting tack.
So what's the bullshit?
I mean, as you would expect, the low-cost little face masky numbers. I mean, the number of lumens delivered is just so farcically
Actually, see
low.
those being promoted a lot via social now, huh?
Oh, really? Oh, shit, I hope I don't get sued for that then.
But in your opinion, they're not that effective?
Yeah,
Or it's not as effective as it could be?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's visual. We see the light and we go, oh, there's the light, so it must be doing something. It doesn't work like that. Light's weird. You take a light meter in here and you get what you think is a sensible reading because we can see each other fine. You look at what that same reading is outside. It's not just a little bit higher. It's like tenfold or more higher. So delivering enough lumens, enough energy, like joules per square meter, that's really, really hard, and actually pretty damn expensive. You need a lot of LEDs, and so it's
Instead of just taking a walk out in the sunlight.
Exactly. That's the problem, is there's always going to be a very, very strong competitor in sunlight.
Unless you live in Europe in winter.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think light will be used, particularly the shorter wavelengths, like in the UV range. Selective fatty acids are a big deal, I think. It's the primary tool that skin uses to control who lives on the surface. The nutrient that skin provides to the microbiome, sebum largely, that is highly, highly curated. And I think sapienic acid has a long run ahead of it. So it's one that we've put a lot of work into, and I think we'll see other skincare lines starting to do the same soon. It's got a good friend called sebaleic acid. We've been working on that for a while. Again, not particularly successfully. It'd be great to run them, because we're doing a lot of microbiome testing with sapienic. It'd be great to pair it with sebaleic acid, because it's another one that's unique to humans and unique to human skin. But we don't have a reliable source of that one yet. And short of pure synthesis, it's not one that we're going to be hunting down too quickly. Look, I think the biotherapeutics that we've been talking about have got a long run, right? They've got a lot ahead of them. So individual strains that are built out for individual outcomes. But I think with the combination of AI and individual cultured strains, I think that's where we're headed. If I had to cast my mind into the future, I would guess that we would do a swab of someone's skin, and not just superficially sequence. We would shotgun metagenomic sequence at quite a deep level to understand exactly which strains are there, and then we would feed that data, and it's a lot of data. That's if you look at one of our normal metagenomic sequencing files, they're like 5 gigabytes. So it's a lot of data to churn. But if you release a machine learning model into that, then you have the ability to do a network analysis and look at the entire network and say to that person, hey, you're missing this node. Like for example, your Malassezia strain of that you have is always associated with this Cocuria bacterial strain, but they need a third partner that's responsible for a metabolite or something, and you're missing that third partner. So that's then the way to use precision biotherapeutics, where you come and replace that missing partner that you've identified, and you figure out which the important ones are by using AI to do a network analysis. So I think that, but I don't even want to know the price tag that's going to be associated with that. But that's where we're headed. Or we're I'm guessing about 1.5 years out, maybe 2 years from delivering the first one of those. But what we're closer to is some work on microbiome transplants. We're backing a lot of energy into that at the moment. Initially we felt that finding donors would be too difficult, but we found routes around this, and I think, it's something we're super excited about. But again, we're probably at least 1 year or 1.5 years out there.
Yeah. I think a microbiome transplant sounds better than AI on my face. It's all over my LinkedIn feed. But I get the point. A great application of AI is to do something like that, right? Because then you can create really individidialized products. I guess that's the next.
I've sat with the data. You sit with the data, and I mean, perhaps I overrate how clever I am. But you sit and look through this data, and I don't know how any human can hold enough in just memory to pair all the correlations, And for now, there are correlations. We haven't established causation. But when you have a big enough library, so let's say we have 1,500 deep shotgun metagenomic sequences of healthy skin paired with a questionnaire, then we can go, hey, the healthy microbiome always has the following nodes. And then when we look at, but I mean, no human can do that, right?
Yeah.
Like you just don't
too
have
many
a process.
permutations.
Yeah. It's just too complex, that network. And I think that is a useful deployment of AI, is to solve problems that just require too much computing power for a human brain.
Do you see any of this? I mean, a lot of it is really technical, quite exciting from an innovation point of view. Do you see a lot of this being able to take place in everyday skincare?
Unfortunately, price comes into it. I think what you'll see is that there'll be a bit of a bifurcation. There'll be a subset of people that can afford this path, this long-term skin health optimization path, and will understand. And then you'll get another subset that either don't care or couldn't be bothered or can't afford to engage in that. And will probably carry on using whatever's sold to them. Yeah.
Which is the reality, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I asked the question. Yeah,
it's not a great, not a great response. Sorry.
Yeah, I guess that does come. That reality of price versus output is always going to be something that is a reality in the skincare business and any business actually. Food, we were talking about earlier. Food, anything related to nutrition, comes at that cost. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for your time, and it was great chatting again.
Cool, Geoff. Thank you.